Hello you lot, Miller Corner here, welcome back once again, and today on the GTV we're going all Alfa Romeo because today, that's right, we're focusing on the pretty bits. Now, quite apart from the aforementioned paint issues and those god-awful condition wheels, one of the worst bits about the GTV are the mirrors. They are very much not in their first flush of youth. The driver's one is particularly bad, it's got all faded and dull and awful. We're going to be taking these off and giving it a fresh coat of paint today, but not in the original silver. I've got a slightly interesting and different colour lined up that you've probably never seen on pretty much any Alfa before. Let's get these off and then I'll show you. It's quite useful at this point to have already taken the door cards off, because I happen to know the first thing you've got to do to take the mirrors off is remove that plastic panel held in with a single Allen headed bolt just there. 4mm, if you're wondering. Here's an Allen key, there's a bolt, let's undo it. Now that's off, it looks like we've got 3 hex-headed bolts and the plug for my bloody hair. 3 hex-headed bolts as well as the plug for the electric mirror control. 5mm Allen-headed bolt thing meets 3 Allen-headed bolt things. The Alfa's awkwardness rears its head again as the access to the bolts is way too small for the ratchet. I have to unbolt the door card on one side, prise it away slightly, and then use an Allen key to turn each bolt about half a turn at a time. The rumours that they say about working on Alfas is true, in that doing the job is simple, it's just the 5 other jobs you've got to do to get
so many cars in it.
I would just like to point out, in the time it has taken me to do this, on the Sagenta I'd have had both mirrors out and probably flatted down by now. With Dad holding the mirror steady, I persevere with the bolts. Such tight, precarious access and the opportunity for the bolts to fall into the door, however, means that it's very easy for one to get stuck. And for this to happen. Oh, you On the plus side, the mirror is out, and it appears that Lady Luck is on our side. By some freaking miracle, the bolt had dropped down to where the speaker is and magnetised to the speaker. So we just took the grill off, unbolted the speaker, got the bolt out. We've managed to say that job is a good un. To prevent the same thing happening with the wiring for the electric mirror, I've cable tied it up to the door frame, because frankly, if that drops down and we then have to take all this off to get it out again, there will be more swear words than my swear beep machine can possibly cover. Right, so after that frankly awful process of getting these mirrors out, they are now out on the bench in the beautiful lockdown spec sunshine, and you can see that they are past their best. We've got some very soft 500 grit sandpaper, because that's all you want on plastic for fear of scratching it. If you flat it down without covering the glass, you risk scratching the glass. So first things first, we need to get it covered up by doing this. And as if by magic, not only is the glass masked up, but we've moved to a different location. Just shows you how wonderfully powerful the finger snap is. You might also notice that the passenger's mirror has been fully flatted down, because that one was easy. The paint was actually in fairly good condition. We now need to do the driver's side mirror, and given the state of this, I thought you want to see this being done. This looks hideous, let's get it flatted down. Behold, 2 mirrors after a particular pain in the arse coming from this one, completely flatted down, cleaned, prepped, ready for paint. And that means it's time for another episode of the internet's favourite DIY show, Joe Paints Random Stuff. Do-do-do. Before we get on to doing the primer though, I want to reveal the colour these mirrors are going to be going, and there's a fairly good chance this might upset some of the Alfa people in the audience. Some of you might not know that as well as Alfas and Fiats, one of my big automotive obsessions is Rover. So in an effort to get these looking a little bit different and a little bit more interesting, the mirrors are going to be going Rover charcoal grey. Yeah, that's right, we're not going to be going black to silver, we're not going black, we're not going gunmetal, we're going a specific Rover charcoal grey. That's to come in a minute. For now, it's time for the primer, so cue the montage. Well, we've got a run on our hands, ladies and gentlemen, though that's what comes from painting it at an angle like that. I've got no one to blame but myself, but now we need to sort this before we can carry on painting these things. Cue the wet sanding! With a wet piece of 1000 grade sandpaper, I slowly and carefully flat the run out of the paint. It's worth noting that this is the day after the paint went on, so it has a chance to harden. I have to be really careful to just get the run area flush with the rest of the paint, and once it's smooth to the touch, I can then dry the whole mirror off and prepare to touch it back up. Both mirrors are mounted in rolls of masking tape to make access easier, and with Dad shining a torch to make sure I've covered everything evenly, I dust a couple of layers of paint back on. Once the coverage is uniform, the mirrors get one more coat overall before the lacquer goes on, and then they're left to dry. Right, while they're drying, we're now going to focus on a bit at the front of the GTV, and we're talking specifically about these bits of grille. They're really faded, there's a few chips taken out of them. Yeah, they're looking rather more grey than black. Oh, that grille looks so good. Good news is I've got some replacements, and they are pretty much mint. Only thing we're going to do is get these old ones out. So if we pop the bonnet, just below here is the screw that holds the bracket that actually holds this grille onto the car. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but yeah, that ain't the most amount of access in the world. So I'm thinking we take this upper tray off, we move the headlight out of the way, and then we should be able to get this grille out. Cue the bit where I'm doing what I just said. This doesn't start well. I haven't got the correct size socket to hand, and keen not to go through the garage and risk crap blowing onto the drying mirrors, I have to go round the entire house to get the right tools. This happens 3 times before I eventually get the plastic arch cover off, and I can then start unbolting the headlight. What I don't know at this point though is that there's a speed clip on the other side which you have to remove before the bolt will come out. What I do know is that I'm tired, frustrated after the paint run situation, hungry and surprisingly cold at the shaded front of the house. The bolt refusing to come out tries what's left of my patience. What is the what? You shouldn't work on a car angry. You'll only make things worse and probably break something. I therefore make the probably wise decision to down tools for the day, order some more supplies and come back the next day in a better mood. The mirrors are done and look awesome. The Rover charcoal grey looks superb with loads of metallic flake in it. After the same tight fiddly procedure in reverse, the mirrors are refitted. It's worth showing how tricky this is. To access these bolt holes, I had to unbolt one side of the door card, prise it away a little bit, and even then access is minimal. No matter, the mirrors are on and they look awesome. It's been more work than planned, but I'm chuffed with the results. Then the bonnet's back up after finding out that the moustache grills have to be changed with the bumper off the car. And roughly now is where research comes in handy, because I've looked up how to actually take the whole bumper off, because I figure if we're going to be doing those little grills anyway, and that does involve taking the bumper off, why not kill 3 birds with 1 stone and sort out those grills, that grill, and this rather appalling lacquer peel. Let's take the bumper off and sort all 3 of them in one go. I've looked up online how you take the bumper off, and it's fairly simple, actually. You can't really see it. I'm going to try and up the lighting on this shot in the edit, but there are 2 hex-headed bolts in here and in here. There should then be bolts holding this plastic cover on, but they're gone on both sides. There should also then be a bolt in here in the upper wheel arch, but once again, that's not there. This shouldn't actually be that difficult, but bearing in mind this is an Alfa, so I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. It turns out to be surprisingly easy. After undoing those 2 bolts in front of the lights, Dad and I can lift the bumper away, and after unplugging the fog lights, 3, 2, 1. Hey! With the GTV looking a little bit more Mad Max, it's time to get to work. The thing with the Alfa is little difficult jobs that you won't think to do separately, and in this particular case, now we've got the front bumper off, there's lots of little bits like this, just little surface corrosion. I think there's a little bit down there as well. Little things that you're not going to take the front bumper off specifically to do, but since the front bumper's off, it makes sense to sort them anyway. So my plan is, I'm going to wire brush all these bits to clean them up a bit, and then I'm going to use some of this. This is Loctite Rust Remedy, SF7503, as the ladies call me. And the idea with this is you clean up any lightly surface rusty areas, you brush this stuff on, and it reduces the rust, and you can then put paint on it, and it should stop anything with surface rust on it getting any worse. Wire brush all the little corroded bits, put a bit of this stuff on, let it dry, quick bit of paint over it just to protect it, and fingers crossed the GTV's life is slightly prolonged. The wire brush highlights how minimal the corrosion actually is, and after cleaning it up, the rust remedy gets brushed on and left to dry and work its magic. You have to leave it overnight to set in, so with the whole front end of the car treated, we carry the bumper over to a rack normally used for painting bumpers. I start by unscrewing and removing the crusty old moustache grills. So we've got the little moustache grills off, and I've got brand new ones in crispy minty condition to go on there. And you may remember in the everything wrong with my Alfa video, I said that the lower grill broke. Yeah, it really broke. It's cracked all the way along here, and in fact, yeah, that clip's just fallen off. There's only one place for this. So I'm going to undo all these screws, prise that out of the way, and I'm going to take all this plastic grill off. With all the bolts, screws and clips removed, I can start to remove what's left of the grill. And with no consideration for preserving it, I can be less than gentle. Hey. Brute force and ignorance wins the day. Grills removed, I take the opportunity to wire brush and then rust remedy the bumper brackets. Again, this is a job you're never going to do separately, so do it while you're there. So while the rust converter's doing its thing on the bumper mounts, we're now going to concentrate on the elephant in the room with the front bumper. This area of lacquer peel. Now we touched on this before, but yeah, it's really bad. It's all flaking off, it's gone dull in places, and it generally looks absolutely dreadful. So the plan is we're actually going to knock all the lacquer peel and flaky bits back. We're going to use some wet sandpaper, starting with 1000 grit and then working our way up to 2000 to smooth all this back, but obviously not go beyond the depth of the lacquer itself. And then we can lacquer over this, and hopefully we can make this pretty much as good as new. That was the plan, but the lacquer peel turned out to be so deep and so extensive that after a day spent wet sanding to smooth it all over, I was left with just one option. Sanding is done. That's right, we've wet sanded every single hideous piece of lacquer peel down to be silky smooth. And obviously you can't tell on the camera, but each and every one of these little lines is just a line. There's no texture to it, there's no feel to it. The original plan was just to kind of flat these back down with some wet sanding and then clear coat over them to kind of bring them back to what the rest of the bumper's like. A good way to see what a paint job is going to look like when you've lacquered it is to put some water on it. So if I just spray some water on it, and then if I wipe it off, you will note that it will be glossy, but you're still going to see all these lines in it. And frankly, if you're still going to see the lines of the lacquer peel, what was the point in getting rid of the lacquer peel in the first place? So rather than just touching it with clear coat, we're going to go a little bit more in depth. Instead, we're going to be repainting this entire corner of the bumper again. You might be wondering, why not just paint the whole bumper? It's worth remembering, this is not a full restoration. This car is not going back to show standards. It's 131,000 mile GTV at the end of the day, and it is going to be my daily. I therefore don't want it to be absolutely perfect because I'll be afraid to use it. I'm going to be making it substantially better though, just by making this one corner of the bumper more uniform with the rest of it. While the bumper was out, it was an opportune time to change all the bulbs in the lights for the front bumper, and indeed some of them weren't long for this world. The indicator bulbs were flaky, and the reason why that one fog light wasn't working is that the filament, I don't know if you can see, had actually fallen out, and indeed it will move if you shake it. This is one of those jobs that I didn't plan to do, but while we're here, we may as well do it. But while we're waiting for the paint to arrive, there is one more thing we can be doing to the bumper. You may remember the completely knackered plastic grills that went behind these two holes in the bumper. If you've got a very short memory span, here's a quick reminder. The trouble is, if you want to get some second-hand replacement for those grills, you're going to be talking about 50, 60, maybe even 70 quid. And frankly, that's not how I roll. So instead, I've bought this roll of wire mesh, and I'm going to be measuring out the sizes of the holes for the grills to go in, cutting it to size, painting it black, and then when the paint on the corner of the bumper is done, we're then going to be attaching this back to the bumper with the same clips and screws that were holding the original broken plastic one in. I'm making a separate grill for both sections, since one sits flat and the other one is offset. I measure the hole's width and length, adding an inch each side to allow for some overhang. I then translate the measurements onto the wire mesh, marking the cutting points with masking tape and using some wire cutters to trim it out. The mesh is then slotted into place on the bumper and more neatly cut to size and shape. After Dad helps stretch the second piece into place, both trimmed grills then get a respray in gloss black. Day 2, and quite apart from the fact a bird has decided to shit on my bonnet, we are actually making really good progress. With the rust converter, they basically say to keep applying layers until it starts to turn black, and when it does, that means it's done its thing. As you can see, we've got a little bit here. You can see it's starting to go black in there as well. So now that we've treated the rust and prevented it from rusting any further, we now need to protect it for the future. This involves sanding the treated areas smooth with 240 grit sandpaper before masking the Alfa up with old crossword pages. Thanks, Mum. Next, the areas are sprayed with primer and then paint to protect them from rusting again. I use silver paint on the silver bits and black on everything else. It's not that neat, but you don't actually see any of this, and the priority is rust protection. With all the rust now treated, it's time to go back to the bumper itself for some slightly neater painting. The paint is here. We're actually doing this inside our shed because this won't fit in the garage on the rack, so we've gone in the shed, I've cleared pretty much everything out, and we've got a torch hanging from the ceiling which is lighting us up today. So I'm going to apologise in advance, it is quite cramped in here if your view of this doesn't turn out very well. We're going to start with just a dust coat, and I've cleaned the whole area that I've flatted down as well as the area surrounding it, so hopefully it should blend in really quite well. Let's crack on and hope for the best. The first coat gets dusted on, overlapping into the unaffected area to blend the paint in. The subsequent 3 coats are carefully closer each time to build the paint up and cover the lines of the flatted down lacquer peel. Using the light to carefully inspect throughout, I spray heavier on the affected area and lighter as I fade into the rest of the bumper. After 4 coats, the paint is nicely covered and well blended. And by the way, those lines are shadows from outside light getting through a vent, they're not marks in the paint. 4 increasingly thick lacquer coats add a shine to the paint, and after a day drying, we're left with this. It's not perfect, but remember, it was done in a shed with rattle cans by me, and compared to how it did look, it's awesome. Next, the bumper brackets, having been rust treated, get sanded, primed and painted black before the shiny new moustache grills are slotted and screwed into place. Then it's onto my custom mesh grills, which get slotted over the existing plastic legs in the bumper and then held in place with all the original metal clips and screws. It takes some fiddling, but with the grills refitted, the bumper refurb is done. It's been a long haul, but it's finally time to refit it.